Okay, welcome to Green Cover Seeds 2018 overwintering plots. My name is Keith Burns, this is Dale Strickler, and we're just going to take you on a little virtual tour of our overwintering plots. Everything that we're going to be looking at here was planted October 17th of 2017. And Dale, I would say we had a pretty cold winter here in Nebraska. How about down in Kansas?
The same. Yeah, we had a lot of things winter kill that we don't ordinarily see winter kill. Down to 15 below or even worse, and so for an extended period of time, and it was quite dry, which compounded it.
In spite of the harsh winter, things overwintered very well. Part of that I think could be because this is kind of protected. Guys, you can kind of pan around. We've got a windbreak to the north. We've got some trees over here to the west, so that probably helped, but it was still cold. Yes. But I think the wind got held off this, so as we work our way down, you're going to see that there's some things that overwintered very, very impressively. So we're going to start out here talking about winter wheat, and we've got several different types of winter wheat here. This plot that I'm standing in is a forage winter wheat. It's a variety called Willow Creek, and it is a very, very long season forage. It's probably the longest season winter cereal that you can plant. You can see this stuff is not even thinking about heading out yet, where the other wheats and the triticales and the rye are all either fully headed or almost fully headed. So Willow Creek, the fit that it has would be you plant it and it's the last thing that you graze, because it will hold its forage quality the deepest into the spring and even the early summer as any of the winter cereals.
Yeah, and one of the problems we run into when people are trying to do a forage system based mostly on annuals is that the winter annuals, most of the winter annuals really lose their quality once they head out, which happens usually in mid-May, and the summer annuals really aren't ready to graze until July. So that leaves a month to 6 weeks with really poor quality forage or no forage. So the Willow Creek, because it heads out so much later than your other winter cereals, it can plug that gap for high quality forage, and that's something we're very excited about.
So kind of that mid-May to mid-June summer slump, it can kind of help fill that
Right.
that little niche there.
Yeah.
And you can tell it's about the same height as the other wheats. Based on what we've seen in the past, this Willow Creek is going to get another, I would say, 18 inches to 24 inches of growth before it fully heads out. So there's a lot of forage potential to come yet on this one.
Yeah, it's not very impressive looking now. In a month, this will be phenomenal, leafy, tall, dense forage. This will be brown.
It'll be straw.
It'll be straw.
Okay.
Right.
And so next we have Gore winter wheat, which is a soft red winter wheat. I believe it was developed in Georgia. It's pretty extensively used throughout the South. We wouldn't necessarily use it here in Nebraska because I always worry a little bit about its winter hardiness. It seemed to do real well up here this year, but it's definitely one of the popular graze out wheats down south.
And one of the benefits of Gore and a lot of other soft wheats is that number one, they tend to be a little more disease resistant if you plant them early for grazing. Compared to our hard red winter wheats, which we try to observe the Hessian fly-free date, not plant them too early because they tend to get vector-borne diseases like wheat streak mosaic and barley yellow dwarf and those sort of things. But another real benefit, as you can see, if we can get this, is that the absence of a beard. Now, this doesn't make a difference until the plants head out, obviously, but after heading out, in a year like this one, where things have just come on so slow and people are desperate for forage, a lot of people are staying on their winter cereals longer than they anticipated, this is still going to be much more palatable than something with a beard on it.
And even if, you know, for putting up hay, as we'll see as we move through the triticales, there's a difference there as well. The next winter wheat we have here is SY Monument. It is a hard red winter wheat. It is a on-leaded, or it's not completely beardless, but the awns are very short. Or well, I guess this is probably a medium on this one, wouldn't you say, Dale? It's not huge like some of the ryes and stuff, but it is does have a beard. You know, we don't use wheat a lot as a spring grazed forage. That's where we prefer the Triticale. As you can see, Dale, show them the difference there between the Triticale and the wheat, the amount of forage that there is.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people say, why should I spend money for rye or Triticale? Wheat is cheap, it's available. I'll just plant wheat and plant it thick. I think you can see the reason that we try to steer people towards Triticale or rye for a winter forage. It's just the difference in productivity between the two is really pretty amazing. And of course, Triticale is a hybrid between rye and wheat. It's intermediate in most characteristics, but there is also a definite hybrid vigor that you get with Triticale. We'll talk a little bit about Triticale versus rye as we get to some of the other plots, but you can see you give up a lot when you just plant wheat.
And we did forage clippings on these plots yesterday, so when the guys get those dried down and weighed up, we'll be able to have a good comparison of tonnage here.
Yeah.
The other thing is that Triticale and rye are going to have a much more extensive root system in the ground, making it a better cover crop, a better soil builder. So again, that's why we like it. But there's certain times when winter wheat has a fit, especially that Willow Creek if you're wanting late grazing.
And you do have the option of a grain harvest here.
Yep.
In case wheat prices ever get up to where they really need to be to make a profit, that's an option. One other drawback though of the wheat compared to the Triticale or the rye is disease, and especially if you plant early. Especially our hard red winter wheats, it is very important not to plant too early or you just get ate up by disease. The Triticales, the ryes, have much better tolerance of early planting to get that maximum forage production.
Yeah. So as we move into the Triticales, one thing to take note on, and this Triticale is probably, you know, getting close to 4 feet tall. Because of the cold late spring, all of the cereals, I would say for the most part, are shorter than normal. We would typically see these all a little bit taller, although the rye is still going to be pushing 5 feet. But most of these, you know, in a more typical spring type year would have more growth and be taller especially. So we've got several different Triticales that we're looking at here. This is one called Montec. This is one out of Montana. We aren't currently raising this, we're just evaluating it. Looks pretty good. It's got a good wide leaf on it and looks like it would have good forage. It looks to be a truly beardless type. I don't even see short awns really on this one. So most Triticales are either have the long beards or they're onletted, as we'll show you on some of these that are just short awns, but this one looks to be truly beardless. So this is called Montec. Then the next two that we're going to look at, we're going to kind of compare these side by side because these are kind of the two that we most often use. I'm standing in what's called Fridge. Fridge is kind of an older variety. It's been around a long time. Lots of people have used it. It is an onletted type, so it does have short awns, but they typically aren't going to be an issue for either haying or grazing, so it's okay to use for that. And then where Dale is standing is a newer one that we've been using called 813, and you don't see a whole lot of difference here, but when we had these in our plots in Oklahoma, when Brett had those plots, Dale, tell them what you saw on those plots down there. We
went down to the plots in the fall. It was absolutely dramatic how much more fall growth the 813 had compared to the Fridge. It was amazing, and seemed to be more winter active, more fall active, more winter active. I think one other thing that it looks to me like obviously the Fridge is a little taller than the 813 right now, but you also see it's also a little farther along.
Yeah.
This has got a little more punch
left
in the tank.
A little longer
yet.
season, so it's going to come on. And when we look at the product sheet on 813, it's definitely one that fits the south better. We're a little concerned about taking it too far north because of winter hardiness, but it certainly has done great here this year. This is the second year we've had it, and it did fine last year too. So, you know, fridge is a good fit. 813, especially if you're going south, or I would say if you're planting earlier, is going to be better because, like Dale said, more fall growth. These weren't planted until October 17th, so we just didn't have a lot of time for fall growth,
yeah,
which may be one of the reasons we're not seeing a big difference.
Yeah.
This next one is a variety called Grazall. It is a bearded type. You can see that this one does have a longer, bigger beard, so we would be a little nervous about getting cattle out here now grazing this, or even putting up hay at this stage because of that beard. There's a lot of bearded Triticales out there, and they're good, but it requires a higher level of management because you need to get the cattle out there or get the swather out there before this beard gets extended.
Yeah, the lack of a beard definitely gives you more flexibility in how you use it, and so we try to gravitate more towards the beardless varieties.
This is a variety called Winter Max. Again, it's one that we're just evaluating. It is a product out of, I can't remember if it's New Zealand or Australia, but they sent us a bag to try. To me, it looks like it'd be a great grain producer. I don't know that the forage value in this would be as good as some of the other ones that we have. But looks like it'd make a lot of grain.
Yeah, and the beards don't seem to be very objectionable on it either.
No, I think I'd say it's unleaded. These next two are spring Triticales. Spring Triticales generally don't overwinter, but these two are a type of spring Triticale called facultative, which means they can act as a winter Triticale, but they don't have to vernalize, so they can be planted in the spring. So these were planted in the fall, and these are a couple different varieties that we're kind of looking at. Usually we wouldn't plant them in the fall, we would plant them in the spring and they would look different. We have those in our spring planted plots that we can look at another time. But this just goes to show you that even in a harsh winter, some of these things can make it through pretty well. Again, I think probably having the protection from the wind helped, but it still got very, very cold, and they made it through pretty good. So we're not going to talk about these a lot here simply because they were planted not necessarily in the right time frame. We would still always recommend a winter variety planted in October, but we wanted to see what it would do, and it actually did pretty good.
Yep. Yeah. So. You want to contrast the rye and the Triticale?
Yeah, go ahead and talk about that a little bit.
Okay. A lot of people kind of tend to use rye and Triticale interchangeably, but there is a real difference. You can see the rye has a much earlier maturity. Of course, this is spring Triticale compared to rye, but rye tends to head out fairly early. It is more winter hardy and more winter active than what your Triticales are. If you're looking for winter grazing, strict winter grazing. Oh, thank you, Keith.
Here's what the winter trip would look like. So
yeah, so here's
taller than the spring, but shorter than the rye.
The rye tends to get very leggy. It comes on earlier, so you can graze it earlier, but it also loses its quality much earlier. If you're looking for grazing on into, in this area, on into May, rye just loses quality very quickly. If you're looking to graze in February, rye is going to be much superior. Rye has some values that we really like, and one of them is weed suppression. And rye is an allelopathic plant, contains compounds that reduce the growth of other plants. A lot of weeds, mare's tail is one of them. Palmer amaranth and other pigweed species is another one. But the winter activity of rye makes it very popular. As a grazing plant, it's great in the winter, not so good in later spring. As far as if you measure the yield on April 1st, the rye is going to really beat the Triticale. If you measure it on May 15th, Triticale is probably going to outdo the rye.
Yeah, and you know, and it's amazing how fast this rye caught up, because when we came out here April 1st, normally this rye would be, you know, knee high and really going. You know, it was maybe 4 inches tall because of the cold late spring that we had. But in spite of that, look at how much it's caught up. I mean, this stuff's 5 feet tall now. And, you know, normally, you know, rye will normally get, you know, between 4.5 and 6 feet tall. And so it's really caught up fast. Can be good grazing, like Dale said, but you got to get on it early. I kind of jokingly tell people, if you're going to graze rye, you need about 1,000 head of cattle for a month. And then you need to find somewhere else to go with them, because you got to stay on it and keep it vegetative, because once it heads out, cattle aren't going to eat it very well.
Yeah, and some people will mix rye with other cereal grains to extend that quality period, or mix rye and annual ryegrass to extend that quality grazing, or do a sequential deal. And that's one reason we're so excited about the Willow Creek, is it gives you an option to go to after rye or Triticale play out.
Yeah, because you could be grazing this rye in February and March, you could be grazing Triticale in April and the first part of May, and you could hit that Willow Creek from the middle of May in through June.
Yeah.
Have a nice program. Just looking at a few different varieties here. These two that I'm in right here, this one over here is a variety called the Rustic. It was developed up in Maine, but it's a very early maturing, fast growing plant. This is Elbon, which is kind of the flagship of what we use. It's from the Noble Foundation in Oklahoma. They're very, very similar in the fact that they both are going to be the first things headed out. It's a little hard to tell. I would say that the Rustic may be headed out and flowered a day or two earlier. Yeah. Most of the pollen is off of this already. There's still some pollen shedding on the Elbon here, but they're going to be very similar. So if you want the thing that's going to mature, head out and grow the fastest, either a Rustic or the Elbon are going to be the best choices. From a grazing standpoint, I would probably go with the Elbon because it was bred specifically for forage. And I think planted earlier, again, these are planted October 17th, planted earlier, I think you'd see a little more fall growth from the Elbon than you would a Rustic.
It's definitely going to be more winter active than the Rustic. It's what we refer to as a southern rye. It's going to be more winter active than the Rustic, which is going to be more winter hardy.
Yeah. But we've never really seen issues with Elbon surviving winters up here, and we've even had it up in the Dakotas, and it seems to have always done well. The next two that we have here are, well, I'll start with the one on my right over here. This is what we call just VNS Northern Rye. It is variety not stated. We don't know exactly what variety it is. It's probably most commonly what people use if they're not specifically looking for a variety. As you can see, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's a great cover crop. It's a great weed suppressor. It is not going to head out and get mature quite as quick as the Elbon or the Rustic, but it's probably not too far behind. The other thing that we really like about Elbon is seed size. Elbon has probably the smallest seed size of any of the ryes. This is a little bit larger seeded stuff. So this is just kind of common VNS northern winter rye. This is one that we've started growing the last couple years here, and we call it Yankee rye. It's one that we've been using, and it's got some characteristics that we think are going to fit pretty well. Dale, why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think you can see that if you compare this to the Elbon, it just seems to be a lot leafier. The leaves seem to be a little bigger. There seems to be more leaves. We think that this is it's going to be kind of intermediate between Triticale and rye. I think
it's got a little bigger stem, a little more of a hollow stem, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I think it will, for people that are wanting to terminate rye with roller crimping, I think this is going to be easier to roller crimp.
You can tell that wind and the rain that we had, it's kind of laid it over a little bit more, and I think it's that bigger, more hollow stem. It doesn't, the rye is kind of like, it's very wiry, very tough, Doesn't go down very easy, but this, like you said, it's a little more like Triticale. It's not Triticale, but it has a few more characteristics like that.
Yeah, it seems to be leafier. I think it's going to yield more forage in the long run, but won't be quite as early as the Elbon. So I think it's going to fit that gap between Triticale and rye.
In this upcoming year, we've got 700 or 800 acres of this under production in South Dakota, so we should have a decent supply of this. We've just kind of been testing it up until this year.
Yeah.
So this is called Yankee rye. Now we're going to move on to winter barley. We've got two good winter barleys here. They both overwintered quite well. Winter barley is probably one of the shortest season of any of the winter cereals. The Elbon may head out slightly before these, but these are going to mature faster. As you can see, we've got a bearded type. This is a new one that we're trying called Saturn. One of the knocks against winter barley, Dale, up in our part of the world up here, is that the winter hardiness is just a little unproven, a little unknown. So for that reason, guys, I think have been a little hesitant to do much winter barley. So we've been looking at it for the last several years. This is Saturn. This is P919 out of the University of Nebraska breeding program. And they both overwintered pretty well. We've been using 919 now for probably 4 or 5 years. It really has come through the winters pretty well. What you're going to see on these, when you plant them in the fall, you're going to get some growth. Most likely, everything above the ground is going to kind of burn off during the winter, and you're going to think, man, I wasted my money, that was bad, because it's all gone. But just give it a little time, it'll green up and it'll start growing again. Whereas like the rye and the Triticale, that above ground foliage never really burns off. In fact, sometimes the rye never really goes completely dormant. So the barley is not going to be nearly as aggressive as those other ones, but for that reason and because of that, this is less challenging to plant corn into.
Yes.
Doesn't have as much alleliopathic effect. It's still good at controlling weeds. If you look down through here, there's a few weeds, but very few.
If you can come over here and look at the alleyway here, you can see quite a bit of mare's tail. But you look in between the rows here, there's not much. And we hear occasional bad reports about planting corn into rye, because rye tends to be pretty aggressive, but we don't seem to hear those negative reports on barley. One of the drawbacks of this P919 is this little loose smut, and we tend to lose a few heads on that. But one nice thing about the barley is even after this heads out, and we said it heads out early, which is a real advantage if you want to roller crimp ahead of organic corn or something like that. But it maintains its quality even in a pasture situation very well after heading out. And it doesn't get as tall as the rye or Triticale, but the forage yields have been fairly impressive, no taller than this. And a lot of that's coming from the head. So it's got a nice fat head.
So the 919 is what we would recommend if you're wanting to graze, especially graze later in the season, have good forage quality. The Saturn is more of a feed barley or a grain barley, and so the market there would be, I mean, you can, if you want to grow it all the way out for grain, you certainly can. And in fact, there's an increasing number of feedlots and dairies that are trying to go completely GMO free. They're looking for barley, for grain, for their feeding operation. So could be a potential market there, but probably the main reason that we would use this would just simply be as a fall planted cover crop for spring planted corn, where the grower does not want the challenge of rye, because if you get a wet spell and you can't get in and spray that rye, it can go from 8 inches tall to 3 feet tall in a matter of a very short period of time. So barley's not going to get away from you, and from that respect, we're looking at it as a cover crop ahead of corn a lot more.
Yeah, And one advantage of barley grain is it does have a reputation for imparting a very good flavor to meat.
Yeah. So
barley fed grain or barley fed meat is in demand in certain locations.
And you can make beer out of it too, I hear.
I've heard that.
All right, this one here really surprised me. I did not expect to see this. This is Cossack Black Oats. It is I wouldn't say it's a true winter oat, Dale, but it certainly has more cold tolerance than the white oat species. We have seen it over winter before, but not always up here. Our production on this is being done in North Texas. They can do production as far north as parts of Tennessee, areas like that. It consistently overwinters. But I was really completely shocked at how well this overwintered. And again, I don't know how much of it had to do with just kind of being protected from some wind. We typically would not recommend this, even in Kansas, as a fall planted crop for something to overwinter. But again, we were just trying it. It is a great plant to put out in August.
Yes.
Because it's not going to winter kill in the low 20s like a regular white spring oats will. It'll grow very vegetatively. It's a very good forage oat, and it will grow deep into the fall and early winter for that kind of that stockpile type grazing.
Right, and it tends not to head out from a late summer planting like your white oats will. And of course, anytime a grass plant heads out, you lose forage quality. And this, you can plant it July, August, and you're not going to have a bunch of headed out plants come November, December when you want to turn out there that livestock just refuse to eat. This is going to stay very vegetative, high quality. The root system is phenomenal.
It does cost a little bit more because it is not nearly as good a seed yielder as a regular white spring oat. So this is Cossack Black Oats here. I guess we can talk about this. This is the cereal blend.
Oh, okay.
Right here. So this is what we call cereal blend. It looks mostly like rye because that's what you can see. But if you get down here and you look, there is barley in here. There's some triticale in there. And so basically what it is we will, as we are cleaning our winter cereals, we'll take kind of what gets contaminated going from one to the other. We'll take what, some of the second cut type stuff. We may mix that together and make what we just call winter cereal blend. And we plant that on a lot of our own acres, but it's, most times it's 70 to 80% rye and triticale, and probably around 20% of the winter barley and the winter oats.
But it's a bargain.
Yeah, it's cheaper.
It's a basically, when I put together a pasture blend for winter, I put together something very similar to cereal blend, and have some oats and barley in there for great fall growth, and then the triticale and rye for the spring.
Well, here's another thing that completely shocked and surprised me. Winter peas generally don't overwinter this well, especially in a cold winter, but these overwintered quite well. So we've got a couple different types here, and where Dale is standing is just a regular Austrian winter pea, and I think we must have ran out of seed because that part of the drill didn't get much planted, but if you look down at the other end, it's got a great stand.
Yeah.
So this is Austrian winter peas. This is a new one that the University of Wyoming developed. It's called Wyo Winter, Y-W-O Winter, Wyo Winter. They developed it from Austrian winter peas, but it was selected to survive the harsh winters of eastern Wyoming, which is really probably a better fit for us. Most of the other peas have been kind of developed for that Pacific Northwest area. So again, we generally don't see winter peas overwinter this well. You have to plant them deep, and we did probably have these planted 2.5 to 3 inches deep, which helps. Again, you're going to see everything that grows above the ground is going to freeze off, and you're not even going to see it in the spring. But then they come back and they regrow. And again, this is a great amount of growth, but I wouldn't have wanted till now to have to plant my corn. But everything was later this year than it normally would have been. But if I could get this kind of growth by mid-May, year in and year out, this would be a phenomenal cover crop. This would be easy to kill with a roller crimper, very easy to plant corn into.
And good forage quality as well, if you want that option. One other thing I really like about peas, spring peas, winter peas, everything, is they make a very good nurse crop. If you can come and look at this, we've got some clover coming in underneath this. Look at that. If it used to be very common to seed wheat, or to seed clover into wheat, and that practice worked years ago when we didn't fertilize wheat very heavily. Once we came out with semi-dwarf wheats that could take heavy levels of fertilizer, the practice of seeding clover into wheat just went away, because we were putting on so much nitrogen. The clover never nodulated. It doesn't nodulate, doesn't grow well. Well, because peas are another legume, they don't need nitrogen fertilizer. So this clover underneath here is going to nodulate very well. And if you are organic, that's a way of getting your clover started in the spring. If you're conventional, peas and clover tolerate a lot of the same herbicides, so you can use the same weed control for both crops. And once you harvest the peas, either for forage or for grain, that clover comes on, and then you've got your next cover crop already established. So you can plant a short-term and long-term cover crop in the same pass.
This next one is annual ryegrass. Annual ryegrass, again, is one that we don't typically think of as being planted after the middle of October. But again, this overwintered here quite well. This is a diploid type, which means it's the more winter hardy. So like Winter Hawk or KB Royal are examples of diploid type ryegrasses that have the best cold tolerance. A lot of times we don't recommend this to be planted after the 1st of October up here in Nebraska, just simply because ryegrass needs to get better establishment before it goes into the winter dormancy in order to survive. So whereas cereal rye could be planted in December, annual ryegrass has to kind of get some roots down and be established in order to make it through. So this did very well. Really came on fast in the spring once it started warming up. As you can see, annual ryegrass is a much finer stemmed plant than what cereal rye is. It does not get nearly as tall. Now this has already gone to head, so we would have wanted to have terminated this far, far earlier. It's much easier to plant into because there's significantly less biomass. The thing that makes this such a great cover crop is, even though this is only maybe 30% the height of that cereal rye, the root system is probably equally as deep as that 5-foot tall rye.
It may not get as deep as rye, but the density, especially in the surface layers, this tends to take wetter soils and heavier clay than the cereals. Much more tolerant of wet, heavy clay. Some other advantages of the ryegrass: it will regrow after grazing very, very well. Ryegrass is used as a long grass because it recovers from frequent close mowing over and over and over again. It doesn't green up as early as the cereals, but it maintains quality later. It's a very, very nutritious plant. I personally plant a mixture of rye and annual ryegrass to get the best of both worlds. One drawback of ryegrass: it is harder to terminate than rye. Either with herbicide, it seems to be much more resistant to Roundup than what rye is, or any of the other winter cereals. And a lot of that, if you look at this leaf surface, you can tell it's very shiny, very waxy. That tends to bead herbicide solutions off the leaf. It's got a waxy cuticle, and spray solutions tend to slide off. So your choice of adjuvant, if you're using a fully loaded glyphosate, it's not fully loaded enough for ryegrass.
And weather conditions are absolutely critical for killing ryegrass. So there's a lot of good information on the internet about how to kill annual ryegrass, but you have to really, really pay attention to the weather and have the right conditions, or you're just wasting your money.
Yeah, over 50 degrees. Add additional surfactant. ammonium sulfate is really critical, and do not tank mix with atrazine or sharpen.
Yeah.
That's a couple big no-nos.
Don't spray on a cloudy day. Don't spray late in the day.
Yeah.
And part of it is that waxy cuticle, but it's also a very, very deep and extensive root system, and you don't have near as much plant area to translocate that chemical down to kill that root system. So yeah. It's a great cover crop. You know, if we can get it to overwinter like this every year, I'd sure recommend a lot more of it up here. But definitely as you go south, or as you move east into wetter areas, there's a lot of this that's flown in prior to harvest on both.
Seeding rate is much lower. I mean, you're looking at 20-25 pounds for a pure stand rate versus, you know, 60, 80, 90 on some of the cereals. So for aerial seeding, where it's nice to get as many acres as you can out of one tank, there's a lot of ryegrass used for aerial seeding. Smaller seed germinates from the surface better than most of your cereals.
Can you say again when this is planted?
This is all planted October 17th. We move into our hairy vetch section. We've got 3 different types of hairy vetch here. This is appears to be a much longer season hairy vetch. This is one called AU Merit. It was developed at Auburn University. Again, we don't use a lot of this. We're just kind of using it as a comparison in a trial. This one that I'm standing in here is the most common one that we use. It's what we just call our Montana hairy vetch. We have it grown in Montana. It's just a VNS, a variety not stated, but you can see it's very much in full bloom.
Yeah, you might, well, if you can catch them here, there's a bumblebee flying around here, and
you mean the one that landed on your neck?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that one. You can tell that this is in full bloom, and it has a real attraction to pollinators. This is all your vetch is very high pollinator value.
So hairy vetch is the most reliable overwintering legume that you can plant in the fall. It's not cheap because it's a very hard crop to harvest. It's easy to grow, it's difficult to harvest, mainly because it's so indeterminate. You see it blooming like this. This will continue to bloom for another 4 or 5 weeks like this if we allowed it. So it's going to have pod set all over the place. Very good aggressive nitrogen fixing crop, and probably the go-to crop for the organic guys to produce nitrogen ahead of a corn crop.
Yeah, and it makes a great, when this gets fully grown, it makes a great mulch. And the mulch is very easy to plant through.
Yeah, and this, you know, my stand here is a little sporadic. Again, I might have been running out of seed when I got down to this end here a little bit, it looks like.
Looks better down there.
Yeah, so, you know, like if you want to do maximum weed control, maximum nitrogen production, you probably need to be planting 30 pounds. Yeah. Whereas in a mix, we may only put anywhere from 4 to 8 pounds in a mix. This is a variety here called Purple Bounty. It was released by the USDA a number of years ago. It is kind of billed as one of the earliest maturing, earliest blooming vetches on the market. So for guys that want to get it to kind of this mid-bloom growth stage as soon as possible, the Purple Bounty is probably the best choice. May not be overall as productive as some of the others, but it gets to where
it gets there quicker.
Gets there quicker.
Yeah, if you're wanting to roller terminate vetch by roller crimping to plant a corn crop, of course you want to get corn in the ground earlier. The earlier flowering of the Purple Bounty is a real bonus. So a lot of the organic guys that want to kill with a roller crimper, this is the variety they tend to gravitate towards.
Okay, and then we got a little bit of woolly pod vetch here. It kind of got taken over by volunteer rye and triticale back there. Woolly pod vetch is a spring annual, so again, we would not typically plant it in the fall, expecting it to overwinter. This section right in here, it did very well. As you move south, it acts as a winter annual, so it's every bit as good as hairy vetch. In Australia and New Zealand, they commonly use it. But woolly pod vetch is a spring annual, so when it's spring planted, this will grow faster and bloom quicker than any of the other vetches. When it's fall planted like this, you can see it's kind of behind the hairy vetch as far as where it's blooming. But if it's a spring planted, this would be ahead of that. So if you're further south, this is going to be a better choice. Or if you're doing a spring plant, woolly pod vetch is a great crop to include. Very deep rooted as well.
Yeah. Can you bring that camera in back here? The vetches tend to be very viney plants, and if you give them something to climb, you can, I mean, you get the trellis effect where, you know, if you have vetch growing by itself, it just makes a mat, and basically you get 1 acre of leaves on 1 acre of ground. If you give it something to climb, you get this corrugated canopy where you can get 2 or 3 acres of leaves on 1 acre of ground. That's one of the real beauties of having diversity in your mix and having tall plants, vining plants, and so forth. And you can see that this vetch, taking advantage of the structure of the rye here and the triticale, you've got more leaves here on the acre. And so that's the same phenomenon is also happening below ground. And it's hard to observe, obviously, what's happening below ground when you're standing above ground, but trust me, it's better.
The last one of the winter legumes that we want to look at is winter lentils, and again, we had a lot of volunteer. This was plots last year as well, so I had a lot of volunteer from previous plots out here, and we didn't do anything to try to clean it up for you. But I wanted to show you what, you know, winter lentils are another option for an overwintering legume. It's not nearly as aggressive as vetch, which can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing. So if you're looking for something that's not nearly as competitive, it's not going to be viney like that vetch can get, winter lentils are a really good choice. They're a smaller plant, they're small seeded, but they're just kind of a good plant. You know, we've actually had more consistency with winter lentils overwintering than winter peas over the years. So it would be another option. It's not going to have the forage value that some of these other things do, but as a companion crop, I would never plant these by themselves unless you were trying to grow, you know, the seed production on them. But as a companion crop mixed in with some of these other things, it's just a nice little plant to complement other things.
Yeah, and I guess one drawback and strength simultaneously of lentils in general, you can see it's letting some weeds through. That's kind of a bad thing. But if you think about it, one place I like to use lentils a lot, when people plant a perennial pasture, which, you know, perennials come on very, very slowly and don't necessarily hold the ground from erosion initially. I like to throw in a few lentils into that situation because they have a leaf structure that lets some sunlight through to the developing plants underneath. They're very short-term plants, so they give way very quickly. They have good grazing value, palatability if you want to do a flash graze and take that off. But I like to throw a few lentils in to a perennial planting for that purpose. Erosion control, some early nitrogen fixation, etc.
All right, that kind of concludes our overwintering plot tour. Again, I'm Keith Burns. This is Dale Strickler. You can get a hold of us. You can email me, Keith@greencoverseed.com, or you can email Dale at greencoverseed.com, or give us a call, 402-469-6784. We'd be more than happy to discuss any of these species with you. Thank you for taking the time to watch.